Our anniversary dinner was perfect until his phone lit up with her photo under My Queen. 23 years of marriage reduced to a notification sound and a woman's face I'd never seen before, smiling back at me from my husband's phone screen like she owned him. The candlelight flickered across the white tablecloth as my world crumbled in that upscale restaurant where David had proposed to me decades ago, where he'd chosen to celebrate our love while actively betraying it. I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at that message preview, watching the words, "Can't wait for tonight, baby," appear beneath her perfectly contoured features. My hands trembled as I reached for my wine glass, the Merlot suddenly tasting like ash in my mouth, while David continued cutting his steak, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire double life had just been exposed by a poorly timed text message. The woman in the photo looked like everything I wasn't anymore at 45. With platinum blonde hair cascading over bare shoulders, lips painted crimson red, and eyes that sparkled with the kind of confidence that comes from stealing another woman's husband. Her name appeared as My Queen with crown emojis, a title I thought belonged to me, a title I'd earned through 2 decades of supporting his career, raising his children, and building the life he now apparently found so disposable. I watched David's face as he finally noticed his phone, watched the color drain from his cheeks as he realized what had happened, watched him scramble to turn the device face down like that could somehow undo what I'd already seen. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, searching for words that could possibly explain away the evidence of his betrayal that sat glowing between us on the white linen. The first twist hit me like a physical blow when I realized this wasn't some recent affair, some midlife crisis mistake that had spiraled out of control. As David fumbled with his phone, trying to silence it, I caught glimpses of their conversation history, months upon months of messages scrolling past in a blur of heart emojis, intimate photos, and plans that had been made around my schedule, around my life, around my complete ignorance of what was happening in my own marriage. She wasn't just some random woman he'd met at a bar or a colleague who'd caught his eye. This was a full-blown relationship, complete with pet names, inside jokes, and a level of intimacy that made my stomach turn. The way he'd saved her contact information told me everything I needed to know about how he viewed our respective places in his life, and I was clearly no longer wearing any crown in his kingdom. "Sarah, I can explain," he whispered across the table, his voice barely audible above the soft jazz music and the clinking of silverware from other diners who were blissfully unaware that they were witnessing the destruction of a marriage. But what explanation could possibly suffice for My Queen and her messages about tonight, for the months of lies I could now see stretching back in their conversation history, for the fact that he'd brought me to this restaurant, our place, while planning to meet her afterward? I felt a strange calmness descend over me as I realized that the man sitting across from me wasn't the person I'd married, wasn't the father of my children, wasn't even someone I recognized anymore. He'd become a stranger who happened to share my last name and my mortgage payments, a stranger who'd been living a parallel life that I'd never suspected existed. The second revelation crashed over me when his phone buzzed again, and this time I could see it was a different woman, someone named Sunshine, with her own collection of suggestive emojis, sending him photos that made my cheeks burn with embarrassment and rage. David wasn't just cheating on me with one woman. He was apparently running some kind of emotional and physical harem that I'd been completely oblivious to while I planned surprise birthday parties, packed his lunches, and worried about his cholesterol levels. The breadth of his deception was staggering, the sheer audacity of it making me question everything I thought I knew about my own judgment, my own intelligence, my own worth as a human being who deserved basic honesty and respect from her life partner. My mind raced back through recent months, reanalyzing every late night at the office, every business trip, Every time he'd claimed to be at the gym or helping his brother with home repairs or attending some work function that spouses weren't invited to attend. The lies had been so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that I felt like I'd been living in some kind of alternate reality where my husband loved me and our life together meant something more than just a convenient cover story for his extracurricular activities. I thought about all the times I'd defended him to my friends when they'd made jokes about wandering husbands, all the times I'd felt smug about our solid marriage while other couples around us struggled with infidelity and divorce. "Who is she?" I asked quietly, gesturing to his phone, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer anymore, wasn't sure I could handle any more revelations about the scope of his betrayal. David's eyes darted around the restaurant like he was looking for an escape route, like he could somehow flee from this conversation and this moment and return to the comfortable compartmentalization that had apparently allowed him to live this double life for months without a flicker of conscience. The silence stretched between us until it became painful, filled only with the ambient sounds of other people enjoying their romantic dinners while ours disintegrated into something unrecognizable and toxic. But then came the third twist that changed everything I thought I understood about my situation. David's phone rang, and when I saw the caller ID, my blood turned to ice in my veins, because it wasn't my queen or sunshine calling him at 9:30 on our anniversary night. It was my sister Linda, the person I'd confided in about my growing suspicions regarding David's behavior, the person who'd encouraged me to stop being paranoid and trust my husband, the person who'd convinced me that I was imagining things when I'd noticed unexplained charges on our credit card and unfamiliar perfume scents on his clothing. Linda, my baby sister, who I'd helped raise after our parents died, who I'd supported through her messy divorce, who I'd trusted with every secret and insecurity I'd ever had. David's face went completely white as he stared at the phone, and I knew with absolute certainty that my sister wasn't calling to wish us a happy anniversary or ask how dinner was going. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity as I remembered all the times Linda had asked about David's schedule, all the times she'd insisted on family gatherings at her house instead of ours, all the times she'd been mysteriously unavailable when I'd needed her most over the past several months. My sister, the woman I trusted more than anyone in the world, had been sleeping with my husband, had been playing the role of supportive sibling while actively destroying my marriage from the inside out. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I could have imagined because it wasn't just my husband who had been lying to me, it wasn't just my marriage that had been built on deception, it was my entire support system, my entire family structure, everything I'd believed about the people closest to me. Linda knew exactly how much I loved David, knew about our struggles with intimacy after my hysterectomy, knew about my insecurities regarding aging and my fears about not being enough for him anymore. She'd used all of that insider information to position herself as the solution to his supposed dissatisfaction, the exciting alternative to his boring, predictable wife who'd given him the best years of her life. David declined the call, but the damage was already done, the truth hanging between us like a toxic cloud that poisoned everything it touched. I thought about all the family dinners where they'd sat across from each other, making normal conversation while I served the meal I'd spent hours preparing. Thought about all the times I'd left them alone together while I cleaned up or tended to other guests, completely trusting in their supposed loyalty to me and our family bonds. The level of planning and coordination their affair must have required made me feel like the most naive, stupid woman who'd ever lived. Sitting there in my anniversary dress while my husband and sister had probably been laughing at my ignorance for months. But the fourth twist was yet to come, and it arrived in the form of David finally finding his voice and saying words that shattered what remained of my worldview. "Sarah, there's something else you need to know," he said, his voice shaking with what I initially thought was remorse, but quickly realized was fear, pure terror about what else he was about to reveal. The house, our house, I had to put it up as collateral for some business investments that didn't work out the way I expected them to. And if I can't come up with $200,000 by the end of next week, we're going to lose everything. The financial betrayal hit me like a freight train because our house wasn't just our home. It was my security, my retirement plan, the thing I'd sacrificed my own career ambitions to help pay for and maintain while he built his supposedly successful business. I'd trusted him completely with our finances, had signed whatever documents he'd put in front of me without question, because I believed we were partners working toward the same goals, building something together that would sustain us through our golden years. The realization that he'd been gambling with our future while simultaneously destroying our present made me feel physically sick, made the expensive anniversary dinner taste like cardboard in my mouth. "You mortgaged our house without telling me?" I whispered, unable to process the magnitude of his deception, unable to understand how someone could destroy so many lives with such apparent ease. "You risked our children's inheritance, our retirement, everything we've worked for, and you didn't think I deserved to know about it?" The other diners around us continued their conversations, completely unaware that my entire life was imploding in real time, that every assumption I'd made about my future had just been revealed as fantasy built on lies and betrayal. David's hands were shaking as he tried to explain about investment opportunities and market fluctuations and business partners who'd let him down. But all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I realized that even if I could somehow forgive the infidelity, even if I could find a way to rebuild trust after his affair with my sister, we might not have a home to return to at the end of this nightmare. The waiter approached our table to ask if we wanted dessert, and I had to bite back hysterical laughter at the normalcy of the question when my entire world had just collapsed into rubble around me. The fifth revelation came when David's phone buzzed again, and this time the message was from someone I recognized, someone whose betrayal cut even deeper than my sister's, because I'd never suspected her of being capable of such deception. It was from my best friend Rachel, the woman who'd been my maid of honor, the woman I'd called when I was worried about David's behavior, the woman who'd assured me that I was being paranoid and that my marriage was solid and enviable. The message preview showed enough for me to understand that Rachel wasn't just another woman in David's collection. She was apparently the one coordinating all of this, the one who'd been managing his various relationships and helping him keep his stories straight. "Rachel knows about all of this?" I asked, my voice coming out as barely a whisper because I was beginning to understand that my entire social circle, my entire support network, had been compromised by people who'd been pretending to care about me while actively working to destroy my life. Rachel, who'd helped me pick out this very dress I was wearing tonight, who'd listened to me worry about David's late nights and distant behavior, who'd convinced me that I was lucky to have such a devoted husband who worked so hard to provide for our family. She'd been playing both sides, offering me comfort and advice while helping David orchestrate the very betrayals that were breaking my heart. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking in its cruelty, making me realize that I'd been living in a carefully constructed lie that involved virtually everyone I trusted and loved. These weren't random affairs or spontaneous betrayals. This was a coordinated effort to deceive me that had required planning, communication, and a level of callousness that I struggled to comprehend. How many conversations had they had about me, about my suspicions, about the best ways to keep me in the dark while they pursued their various selfish interests at my expense? I thought about all the girls' nights with Rachel, where she'd encouraged me to drink too much wine and share my deepest insecurities about my marriage. All the time she'd offered to babysit our kids so David and I could have alone time that he was apparently spending with other women instead. The manipulation was so sophisticated, so thoroughly planned, that I felt like I'd been the unwitting star of some cruel reality show where everyone knew the truth except me. My own life had become a lie that other people were directing while I played the role of the oblivious wife, and I'd apparently been playing it perfectly for months. But then came the sixth twist, the one that made everything else pale in comparison, when David's phone rang again, and this time the caller ID showed our daughter Emma's name, our 19-year-old college student who was supposed to be safely away at school, focused on her studies and building her own life. "Why is Emma calling you at this hour?" I asked. A new kind of dread settling in my stomach, because our daughter never called during her father's business dinners or our anniversary celebrations unless something was seriously wrong. David's face went ashen as he stared at the phone, and I knew with horrible certainty that somehow our daughter was involved in this nightmare, that the corruption in our family ran even deeper than I'd imagined. "Answer it," I demanded, my voice stronger than I felt, because I needed to know how far this rabbit hole of deception went, needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with, even if it destroyed what remained of my faith in the people I loved most. When David finally answered the call, putting it on speaker because his hands were shaking too badly to hold the phone steady, Emma's voice came through clear and panicked. "Dad, the private investigator you hired found out about Mom's affair with her personal trainer, and he's threatening to tell her unless you pay him another $50,000 on top of what you already owe him." The words hit me like a physical assault, because not only was our daughter apparently involved in spying on me, but they thought I was the one having an affair, thought I was the one destroying our marriage with my supposed infidelity. The irony was so twisted, so absolutely mind-bending, that I almost laughed, despite the horror of the situation. Because while they'd been building their elaborate conspiracy to deceive me, they'd simultaneously been investigating me for crimes I'd never committed, creating fictional betrayals to justify their very real ones. The personal trainer Emma mentioned was Marcus, a 60-year-old grandfather who'd been helping me rebuild my strength after my surgery, who'd been nothing but professional and encouraging during our sessions at the gym. The idea that anyone could interpret our therapeutic relationship as an affair was so absurd that it would have been funny if it weren't being used to manipulate and extort my husband. "Emma, your mother is sitting right here," David said weakly, and I could hear our daughter's sharp intake of breath as she realized she'd just revealed the extent of their surveillance and suspicion to the very person they'd been investigating. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the weight of a family that had completely lost its way, that had become so consumed with lies and betrayal that they couldn't even recognize trust and innocence when it was sitting right in front of them. "Mom?" Emma's voice was small and uncertain, like the little girl she used to be when she'd been caught in a lie about broken dishes or unfinished homework. Except now she was 19, and the lies were about marriage and money and private investigators. "I thought, Dad said that you were—" Her voice trailed off as she realized that everything her father had told her about me, everything that had justified their spying and their secrets, had been fabrication designed to make her an unwitting accomplice in his deception. The seventh revelation unfolded as Emma, now crying openly over the phone, began to confess that she'd been feeding information to her father about my schedule, my activities, my friendships, believing that she was helping him catch me in some imaginary affair that would explain his distant behavior and late nights. Our daughter had been turned into a spy against her own mother, manipulated into believing that I was the villain in our family story, while her father systematically destroyed everything we'd built together. "I followed you to the gym, Mom, and I saw you talking to Marcus, and it looked like— Dad said that married women don't need personal trainers unless they're trying to impress someone other than their husbands," Emma sobbed. and I could hear the confusion and guilt in her voice as she began to realize how she'd been used. My heart broke not just for the betrayal I was experiencing, but for the way David had corrupted our daughter's perception of normal, healthy relationships, had taught her to view innocent interactions through a lens of suspicion and mistrust that would probably damage her own future relationships. The private investigator David had hired had apparently been feeding him falsified reports about my supposed infidelity, creating evidence where none existed, because a man who's lying to everyone in his life apparently expects everyone else to be lying too. The paranoia and projection were staggering in their scope, revealing a level of psychological disturbance that I was only beginning to understand. David hadn't just been cheating on me, he'd been living in a completely alternate reality where I was the unfaithful one, where his behavior was justified by my supposed crimes, where our entire marriage was built on mutual deception rather than his unilateral betrayal. I looked across the table at this man I'd shared a bed with for over 2 decades, this man who'd fathered my children and promised to love me until death do us part, and realized that I'd never known him at all. The David I'd married was apparently a fiction, a performance he'd put on long enough to secure my trust and my commitment before revealing his true nature as someone capable of destroying his own family without a flicker of remorse. The waste of it all, the sheer unnecessary cruelty of it, made me feel like I was suffocating in the elegant restaurant where we'd once been so happy. But the 8th twist was still to come, arriving in the form of Emma revealing that she hadn't been David's only recruit in his surveillance operation against me. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but Grandma Betty has been watching you too. And she's the one who told Dad about your therapy appointments and your book club meetings and all the times you go to coffee with your friends." My mother-in-law, the woman who'd raised David, who'd welcomed me into their family, who'd helped me through difficult pregnancies and challenging times, had been spying on me too, reporting my every move to her son like I was some kind of criminal under investigation. The betrayal by Betty cut particularly deep because I genuinely loved her, had considered her more of a mother than a mother-in-law since my own parents had died years earlier. I'd confided in her about my worries regarding David's behavior, had sought her advice about how to reconnect with her son, had trusted her with my vulnerabilities and fears about our marriage. She'd listened with apparent sympathy and concern while simultaneously gathering intelligence to report back to David. Preserve the original language of any suspicions I might have developed about his activities. The coordination required for this level of deception was staggering, involving not just David's affairs but an entire network of family members who'd been turned against me without my knowledge or understanding. I felt like I'd been living in enemy territory while believing I was surrounded by people who loved and supported me. Like I'd been fighting a war I didn't even know existed, while my opponents had been gathering intelligence and planning strategies for months or possibly years. Emma was still crying on the phone, begging for forgiveness for her role in what she was beginning to understand had been a massive manipulation orchestrated by her father. "He told me that you'd been acting suspicious, that you'd been lying about where you went and who you talked to, and I believed him because he's my dad, and I thought he was just trying to protect our family," she sobbed. And I could hear the devastation in her voice as she realized how completely she'd been used. The 9th revelation came when Emma mentioned that her younger brother Jake, our 16-year-old who was supposed to be at a friend's house tonight, was actually with Linda, helping her move furniture because David had told the kids that their aunt was going through a difficult divorce and needed family support. The irony was crushing because Linda wasn't going through a divorce, she was actively contributing to mine. And our son was unknowingly helping the woman who was destroying his parents' marriage while believing he was performing an act of family loyalty and kindness. "Jake doesn't know anything about any of this, does he?" I asked, my voice breaking, because I couldn't bear the thought that both of our children had been drawn into David's web of deception, that our son's innocence had been corrupted the same way Emma's had been. The idea that Jake might have been turned into another unwitting accomplice in the destruction of his own family was almost more than I could handle, adding another layer of maternal protective rage to the complex mixture of emotions that were threatening to overwhelm me completely. "No, Jake just thinks he's being helpful," Emma assured me, but then added words that sent chills down my spine. "But Dad has been asking him a lot of questions about what you do when he's not home, about who calls the house and what you talk about, and Jake thinks it's just because Dad wants to be more involved in our family life." Even our teenage son had been turned into an intelligence-gathering operation without realizing it, his natural desire to connect with his father being manipulated to serve David's paranoid need for control and information. The systematic nature of the surveillance made me feel violated in ways I was still trying to process. Realizing that virtually every conversation I'd had with family members had been reported back to David, that my privacy had been completely non-existent for months while I'd believed I was living in a loving, trusting household. Every phone call I'd made, every friend I'd visited, every errand I'd run had been cataloged and analyzed for signs of infidelity that existed only in David's guilty imagination. The 10th twist arrived when David's phone buzzed with a text from someone named Detective Morrison. And when I saw the preview, I realized that the private investigator wasn't just investigating me. He was blackmailing David with evidence of his own affairs, creating a web of extortion and manipulation that had spiraled completely out of control. The investigator had photos, videos, financial records, and communications that documented David's various relationships and illegal activities. And he was demanding increasingly large sums of money to keep quiet about what he'd discovered. "You hired someone to spy on me?" I asked, the cosmic justice of the situation providing a small amount of satisfaction in the midst of my devastation. David had created his own nightmare, had opened the door to investigators who'd apparently been far more thorough than he'd anticipated, documenting not just my innocent activities, but his very guilty ones as well. The hunter had become the hunted, and the evidence that was supposed to justify his behavior was instead going to be used to destroy him. David nodded miserably, apparently realizing that his elaborate schemes had backfired spectacularly. That his attempts to find evidence of my supposed infidelity had instead created a permanent record of his actual infidelity that could now be used against him in divorce proceedings or potentially even criminal charges if any of his financial activities had crossed legal lines. The investigator had been building a case against David while pretending to investigate me, gathering evidence that would ensure David's complete destruction if ever became public. "How much does he want?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why I cared about David's problems anymore, why I felt any obligation to help him clean up the mess he'd created through his own paranoia and betrayal. Perhaps it was just morbid curiosity about the full scope of the disaster he'd brought upon our family, or perhaps some small part of me still felt protective of the man I'd once loved, even though that man had apparently never really existed. The 11th revelation was that Detective Morrison wasn't actually a licensed private investigator at all, but rather a con artist who specialized in targeting unfaithful spouses, offering services that seemed legitimate but were actually elaborate schemes to gather blackmail material and extract money from guilty parties who couldn't risk exposure. David had been completely taken in by the con, paying thousands of dollars for fake surveillance reports while simultaneously providing the real information that the fake detective needed to extort him. "He's been recording our conversations, taking photos of me with Linda and the others, documenting everything I thought I was hiding," David admitted, his voice hollow with the realization that his secret life had become someone else's business opportunity. The very affairs he'd been so careful to conceal had been exposed to a stranger who now held the power to destroy not just our marriage, but potentially his career, his reputation, and his freedom if any of his financial activities had involved fraud or embezzlement. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and horror as I realized that David's paranoia about my fictional affairs had led him directly into the hands of someone who would use his very real affairs against him. The symmetry was almost poetic, the way his lack of trust in me had made him vulnerable to someone who truly was untrustworthy, someone who'd seen him coming from a mile away and had played him like a violin. But then Emma's voice came through the phone again, shaky and uncertain. "Mom, there's something else, something I just found out tonight that I don't think Dad knows I know about." The dread in her voice made my stomach clench with anticipation of yet another revelation, another layer of betrayal that I wasn't sure I had the strength to process. How much more could there be? How deep did this rabbit hole of deception go? How many more people I trusted were going to be revealed as active participants in the destruction of my life? The 12th twist came when Emma revealed that Rachel, my best friend who'd been helping coordinate David's affairs, was actually married to Detective Morrison, the fake investigator who was blackmailing my husband. The entire operation had been a setup from the beginning, a sophisticated con game that had targeted our family specifically because Rachel had inside information about our finances, our relationships, and our vulnerabilities that she'd gathered during years of friendship and trust. "Rachel's been planning this for months, maybe even years," Emma said, her voice full of horror as she realized how thoroughly we'd all been manipulated. She married this con artist, and together they've been targeting wealthy couples where the husband is showing signs of having affairs. They get the wives to confide in Rachel about their suspicions. Then they approach the husbands, offering to investigate the wives, and then they use whatever they find or create to blackmail everyone involved. The sophistication of the operation was breathtaking, involving psychological manipulation, identity fraud, and what amounted to organized crime targeting families like ours who had assets worth stealing and secrets worth exploiting. Rachel hadn't just betrayed our friendship, she'd weaponized it, using every conversation we'd ever had about my marriage to build a profile of our family's weaknesses and entry points for manipulation. I thought about all the times Rachel had encouraged me to join social media, to share more details about our life online, to post photos of our home and our vacations and our financial successes. She'd been gathering intelligence, building a case file on our family's worth and vulnerabilities, preparing for the long-term con that was now reaching its devastating conclusion. Every girls' night, every heart-to-heart conversation, every moment of genuine friendship I'd thought we'd shared had been contaminated by her ulterior motives and criminal intentions. The 13th revelation emerged when David's phone rang again, and this time it was his business partner calling with news that made his financial situation even more desperate than I'd realized. The investments that had gone wrong weren't just bad luck or poor judgment, they were part of an elaborate Ponzi scheme that David had unknowingly participated in. And now federal investigators were looking into the business's financial records, which meant our personal assets could be frozen while they determined the extent of our involvement in what might be considered wire fraud. "They're seizing the business accounts tomorrow," David said after ending the call, his voice completely defeated. "Everything we have, everything we've worked for, it's all going to be tied up in the investigation. And even if they determine that I was a victim rather than a perpetrator, it could take years to get any of our money back." The house that was already at risk due to his gambling with our mortgage was now doubly in jeopardy because the government might claim our assets as proceeds from criminal activity, even though we'd been victims of the scheme rather than willing participants. I realized that even if I could somehow find a way to forgive David's infidelity, even if I could rebuild trust after the betrayal by my sister and my best friend, we might not have anything left to rebuild with because our entire financial foundation had been built on criminal activity that we'd been unaware of. The life I'd thought we were living, the security I'd thought we were building, the future I'd thought we were working toward had all been illusion built on other people's lies and criminal schemes. The waiter approached our table again. clearly concerned about the length of time we'd been sitting there without ordering dessert or asking for the check, but I couldn't even imagine explaining our situation to him, couldn't find words to describe the complete collapse of everything I'd believed about my life and my relationships. David waved him away weakly, apparently as overwhelmed as I was by the cascade of revelations that kept coming like punches to an already battered consciousness. But then came the 14th twist, the one that changed my understanding of everything that had come before it, when Emma's voice came through the phone one more time. "Mom, I need to tell you something that's going to sound crazy, but I think Grandma Betty might not actually be Grandma Betty anymore." The words were so bizarre, so unexpected, that I initially thought our daughter was having some kind of breakdown from the stress of everything she'd learned that evening. "What do you mean she's not Grandma Betty?" I asked.
Though I was beginning to suspect that nothing was too outlandish anymore, that our family story had moved so far beyond normal reality that anything was possible. Emma's voice was shaking as she explained that she'd been staying with her grandmother the previous weekend and had noticed inconsistencies in Betty's behavior, gaps in her memory about family events, confusion about things she should have remembered clearly. "I think someone is pretending to be Grandma Betty, or maybe Grandma Betty is being controlled by someone else, or maybe she's sick in a way that's making her act completely different," Emma said, and I could hear the fear in her voice as she described a woman who looked like her grandmother but seemed to have lost substantial portions of her memory and personality. "She didn't remember Dad's middle name, Mom. She didn't remember the story about how you and Dad met. She didn't remember that I'm allergic to strawberries, something she's known my entire life."
The implications were terrifying, because if Betty wasn't acting of her own free will, if she'd been compromised in some way by the same criminal organization that had targeted our family, then the scope of the conspiracy was even broader than I'd imagined. Elder abuse, identity theft, possibly even kidnapping could be involved, adding federal crimes to what was already a devastating personal betrayal. I thought about the last few times I'd seen Betty, trying to remember if there had been signs of confusion or personality changes that I'd attributed to normal aging but might have actually been indicators of something more sinister. The woman who'd been reporting my activities to David might not have been my mother-in-law at all, but rather someone impersonating her, someone who'd been planted in our lives to gather information and manipulate our family dynamics from the inside. The 15th twist arrived when David's phone rang yet again. And this time, the caller ID showed Betty's number, but when he answered, the voice on the other end wasn't hers at all. It was a man's voice, cold and professional, informing David that his mother was safe but would remain in protective custody until certain financial obligations were met, obligations that had apparently been accumulating interest and penalties for months, while David had been distracted by his affairs and financial schemes. "Your mother is comfortable and well cared for, Mr. Harrison, but her continued safety depends on your cooperation with our payment schedule," the voice said, and I realized that Betty had been kidnapped, possibly months ago, and the woman we'd been interacting with was an imposter who'd been gathering information about our family while the real Betty was being held hostage somewhere. The surveillance, the manipulation, the elaborate cons that had destroyed our marriage were all part of a larger criminal enterprise that had specifically targeted our family for reasons I was only beginning to understand. David's face went completely white as he listened to the kidnapper's demands, which included not just the money he owed for the fake investigation services, but additional payments for Betty's care and housing during her captivity. The criminals had been playing a long game, infiltrating our family through multiple entry points, destroying our relationships and our finances, while simultaneously holding David's mother hostage to ensure his compliance with their increasingly outrageous demands. "How long has she been gone?" I whispered, thinking about all the conversations I'd had with the woman I'd thought was Betty, all the family dinners and holiday celebrations where we'd been interacting with an imposter while the real Betty was suffering somewhere in captivity.
The violation felt personal and profound, realizing that even our family gatherings had been contaminated by criminal activity, that our children had been forming relationships with someone who was actively working to destroy their family. The 16th revelation came when the kidnapper informed David that Linda, my sister, had also been compromised, that the woman who'd been having an affair with my husband wasn't actually my sister, but another imposter, another actress in the elaborate criminal production that had been designed to destroy our family from every possible angle. The real Linda had been missing for weeks, possibly months, while I'd been hating her for betrayals she'd never actually committed. "We needed someone who knew your family dynamics intimately," the voice on the phone explained with chilling matter-of-factness. "Your sister was very helpful in providing background information before she became uncooperative and required more direct management." The casual way he discussed kidnapping and impersonation made my blood run cold, realizing that we'd been dealing with professional criminals who specialized in this type of long-term psychological and financial manipulation. I thought about the last real conversation I'd had with Linda, trying to remember when her behavior had started seeming different, when she'd begun asking unusual questions about David and our finances. The woman who'd been sleeping with my husband, who'd been systematically destroying my marriage, wasn't even the person I'd been angry at. Linda was somewhere in captivity, possibly injured or worse, while I'd been blaming her for crimes committed by someone wearing her face. The sophistication of the operation was staggering, involving identity theft, kidnapping, fraud, extortion, and psychological manipulation on a scale that seemed more like something from a movie than real life. These weren't random criminals or opportunistic con artists. They were professionals who specialized in targeting specific families, studying their relationships and vulnerabilities for months before moving in to systematically destroy everything they'd built. But the 17th twist was yet to come, and it arrived when I realized that my own identity might have been compromised as well, that the woman sitting in this restaurant might not even be the real Sarah Harrison anymore. The thought hit me like a physical blow because some of my recent memories felt foggy and inconsistent, and I'd been attributing the confusion to stress and aging. But what if someone had been drugging me, manipulating my perceptions, making me question my own sanity while they implemented their complex criminal scheme? "David, when was the last time you're absolutely certain you were talking to the real me?" I asked, my voice barely audible because I was beginning to question everything about my own recent experiences, wondering if the woman who'd been living my life had actually been me or someone else entirely. The paranoia was overwhelming, but given everything else we'd discovered, nothing seemed too outlandish anymore. No violation too extreme for the criminals who'd targeted our family. David stared at me with growing horror as he realized the implications of my question, as he began to examine his own recent memories for signs that I might have been replaced or compromised the same way his mother and sister had been. "The surgery," he said suddenly, his voice filled with terrible understanding. "After your hysterectomy, when you were recovering, there were days when you seemed different, when you said things that didn't sound like you, when you seemed confused about things you should have remembered." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity, as I realized that my medical recovery period would have provided the perfect opportunity for someone to substitute themselves for me, to study my behavior and relationships while I was vulnerable and disoriented from pain medication and surgical trauma. The real Sarah Harrison might have been kidnapped during what I remembered as a routine recovery period, while an imposter learned to live my life and destroy my marriage from the inside out. The 18th revelation came when I realized that if I wasn't the real Sarah, then the woman sitting in this restaurant, the woman who'd been discovering these betrayals and feeling this pain, might actually be one of the criminals who'd been hired to destroy my family. The existential horror of the possibility made me feel like I was losing my grip on reality, because how could I tell the difference between my own thoughts and emotions and those of someone who'd been trained to impersonate me?
But then Emma's voice came through the phone again, and she said something that provided a small anchor of certainty in the storm of doubt and confusion. "Mom,
Remember the song you used to sing to me when I was little? The one about the butterfly who lost her wings?" It was such a specific, intimate detail, something that only the real Sarah would know. And when I found myself automatically humming the melody, I knew that whatever else had been compromised, my core identity, my essential self, was still intact. The relief was overwhelming because it meant that the pain I was feeling was real, that the love I had for my children was genuine, that the devastation of discovering my husband's betrayal was authentic rather than a performance. I was still me, still the woman who'd built this life and this family, still the person who had the right to be angry and hurt and determined to find a way through this nightmare. The 19th twist arrived when David's phone rang one final time, and when he answered, it was Jake's voice, our 16-year-old son.
calling from what he thought was his Aunt Linda's house, but was apparently some kind of criminal safe house where he'd been taken under false pretenses. "Dad, something's really wrong here," Jake said, his voice scared and confused. "The woman I thought was Aunt Linda is talking to some men about money and kidnapping, and they keep mentioning you and Mom, and I think I need to get out of here right now." The realization that our son was in immediate physical danger snapped me out of the paralysis that had been holding me captive throughout this evening of revelations, reminding me that whatever else was happening, whatever crimes were being committed against our family, my children's safety had to be the priority above everything else. "Jake, where exactly are you?" I demanded, grabbing David's phone and putting it on speaker so we could both hear our son's response clearly. "I don't know, somewhere on the outskirts of town, in a warehouse district," Jake said, his voice getting quieter, as if he was trying to avoid being overheard. "There are a bunch of cars here and people coming and going, and it looks like some kind of business operation, but not a normal one. Mom, I'm scared, and I don't think the woman who brought me here is really Aunt Linda, and I don't think she ever intended to bring me back home tonight." The 20th and final twist came when I realized that this entire evening, this anniversary dinner, this carefully orchestrated revelation of betrayals and crimes, had been designed to keep David and me occupied and distracted while the criminals completed their operation by taking our son hostage. Everything else had been elaborate theater designed to ensure that we'd be sitting in this restaurant, overwhelmed and immobilized by shock, while they moved to the final phase of their plan. The fake affairs, the financial crimes, the kidnapped family members, even the fake investigator and the blackmail scheme had all been components of a larger plan to destroy our family completely while extracting maximum financial benefit from our destruction. We'd been the unwitting stars of an elaborate criminal production, and now they were ready to conclude the show by taking our children and demanding ransom for their safe return. "Call the police," I told David, my voice steady despite the terror I was feeling, because whatever else had been destroyed tonight, whatever trust had been broken, and what relationships had been revealed as lies, our children were real and their danger was immediate and nothing else mattered compared to getting them to safety. The criminals had made one crucial mistake in their elaborate plan. They'd underestimated a mother's willingness to fight for her children, no matter what other devastation she was dealing with. As David dialed 911 with shaking hands, I realized that our marriage might be over, our finances might be destroyed, our extended family might be scattered or compromised, but our immediate family, our children, could still be saved if we acted quickly and decisively. The elaborate criminal conspiracy that had targeted us for months was finally going to be exposed, and while the cost had been devastating, we still had a chance to protect what mattered most and begin the long process of rebuilding our lives on a foundation of truth rather than the elaborate deceptions that had nearly destroyed us completely.